Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Richard Lewis Show, and a very special guest today, someone I've been wanting to get on the show for ages. I've had to climb that ladder of status to get noticed. It's one of the greatest games critics currently active in the field, Colin Moriarty. Thank you so much for being here. Hoping we're going to talk about some topics that are going to put the world to rights. But before we get into it, small talk. How are you doing?
I'm very well. Thank you, first of all, for having me. Very kind words. Very good to be here with you. I've been following you on Twitter for a long time.
I apologize profusely.
No, it's all good. I feel like because you're in a kind of a different world than I am in a lot of ways in the industry, like the different pies, the little slices of the pie.
Yeah.
And so it's always been interesting to read your tweets and insight and stuff like that into kind of a mostly a different world that I don't cover in PlayStation or that I didn't cover in more traditional media. So it's very good to finally speak with you, and I thank you for having me. And I'm doing great, so thank you.
I'm glad to hear that, man. I mean, yeah, it's esports is a niche within a niche is sort of how I've always described it, and so a lot of the stuff that we would have had overlap about, with just video games in general, there are some unique rules to our space which no longer hold true, because you're essentially distilling competitive games down to a very hardcore element, and
right.
When I started doing it in 2004, I mean, it was nothing. I mean, it was like first LAN event I went to was 20 guys in a barn playing a fucking PlayStation on a tiny little TV. It was not what it's gone on to become. But, equally, there is a lot of overlap now with some of the things that are happening in gaming. I think some of the things that are happening in terms of gaming coverage, and just also as well, I think a lot of games are designed now with the understanding, as long as you bake a hardcore competitive aspect into it, you will have an esport. Whether it lasts a year or 10 years, as some have, it's a marketing extension. It gives extra life and extra value to your game, and therefore, extra money, right? So
sure. And I also like that it, even though I'm totally ignorant of most of the games, because I play mostly single player stuff, what I really dig about it, we were actually talking about the NFL before we started briefly, and we're both big football fans. And I like esports because it adds that extra component that is no longer comes off as fanboyish, for instance, being a PlayStation fan or an Xbox fan, but rather a fan of a competitor or a team. I like how it brings up that whole meta aspect to gaming. And I'm always eager to find those meta aspects to gaming. It's why I love trophies, for instance. So I'm very attracted to that world. I just wish that I was, first of all, I'm horrible at multiplayer games. My gaming skills are just atrophying rapidly anyway.
Oh, that happens. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I was just reflecting to someone. I'm like, I'm pretty sure I used to be Kid Icarus when I was like 7 or 8 years old, and I can barely beat anything now on the NES. So things have totally changed, but I just wanted to throw in that I really like that aspect of esports, and it's what's been most attractive to me is the story within the story, very similar to following an NFL team. So,
well, they're even making boomer esports now, effectively. There's a lot of card game esports that have, Magic, Wizards have kind of wanted to transpose almost everything online, which I'm kind of mixed about, because one of the things when I was pushing for kind of more structure in esports, I used to love the Wizards of the Coast tour as it used to be. And that idea of having, meetups and interpersonal stuff and, people gathered around the table watching everything. There was a lot of stuff I wanted to hijack and put into esports, and we did some of it. But it turns out it's really become something that isn't just a preserve of hardcore kids anymore, or ultra hardcore Koreans that can get an exemption from a year of national service, or whatever it is. It's right. There was a story the other day. It's complete garbage because of course it's in the mainstream media, but Fortnite's player's mother signed a professional contract because she was so into the game and plays the game competitively, and it was kind of seen as endearing because she was supporting her son, who's a top 10 player in the world. She's got a contract now and probably is going to become the next influencer sensation. So she's 58. I don't even know what the hard limit was. I was always telling myself I'd get out of this at 40, and that's looming. So
yeah, it's the same thing for me. I'm 36 now, and I thought I'd be out of this by now too, but it draws you back in. And hey, I'm really happy that you're more of a you like the I used to play Magic back in the day, more of the physical card games, customizable card game stuff. I do want to recommend, I'm sure you've seen it because you're in this space, but there's an amazing video I saw maybe last year of the very first ever Magic the Gathering tournament. Have you ever seen it?
Yeah,
From like 1994 or something like that.
Dude. It's
amazing
crazy.
footage, just absolutely amazing. Yeah, I was just thinking of that too.
Well, that was the other thing, brother. Like, there's not a lot of archiving gone on from the good times because there was essentially nowhere to put it. You know, I try and explain it to Zoomers today. I'm pre-YouTube, you know, we didn't, all that World of Warcraft stuff that you've heard about, you know, all the world firsts from way, way back.
Right.
But, you know, there was, you know, you've got these tiny little 240p, you know, filmed on a mobile if you're lucky. And that's kind of it. There's like an entire era that just, we've only got stories really about it. Stories
it's
in
a shame.
obscure forums.
It's a shame, like, because when I was at IGN, it was the same thing. Like, you would have like the small QuickTime video. You might have to wait a day, like overnight, for it to even buffer, and then you would, you know, and then you would check it out. So, yeah, totally. And I my hope is that as people find videotapes and old things and they go through them, that they realize that just at this point, anything that's old is useful. And commercials, old TV shows, like if you have a fucking episode of Ricky Lake, you know, from 1993, it's like upload that right away, you know. Please. So yeah, that's what, so anyway.
No, but there is, I mean, it's a problem in television as well. So many things have kind of not been archived and preserved. I mean, you know, I'm a big fan of a lot of older TV shows. There was a lot of issues like this with you know, when things went into syndication, and then it was different people's responsibility to show it, and so they would get lost as it was being physically transported from building to building. And, you know, there was like Twilight Zone stuff and all of that.
And they overrode things too, right? I thought I was reading about, maybe it was Red Dwarf or something. So some show like that that's well respected, where they're like, some of this stuff's just gone, or like old sitcoms from, you know, that were even live events, like teleplays, are just gone. And it's sad. A shame. So yeah,
it's sad. So look, speaking of sad, let's get right into it. I'm gonna throw us into the deep end for a topic because you know, I've introduced you as, I think, one of the, you know, real solid gaming critics in the space, which doesn't tell the full story. But obviously you've been in the games industry for a long time. You've had very long tenures at websites like IGN, and there's kind of a reason you're on the path that you're on. And you know, I kind of watched something happen to you that also happened to another friend of mine, Total Biscuit. And it's kind of essentially, this is what's made me kind of so aggressive towards, you know, these media people. But essentially you were rendered, it felt like almost overnight, persona non grata to a business you had served so well over the basis of a singular tweeted joke. So I don't want to put words in your mouth, and I'm sure you've rehashed this story a million times. I can only apologize. But
it's okay.
Now with your latest perspective on it, I mean, it seems ridiculous. If I've explained it to people what happened, and they go, there must be more to it. You must have been a piece of shit behind the scenes or something. And I'm like, no, you know, nice dude by all accounts, never heard a bad word, one tweet. That's all that happened.
Yeah. Yeah. And what we were saying beforehand too is, like, for your audience, they're new to this. Anyone that's coming from me, I'm sorry, because you haven't heard this before, but let's explain it again. And I like the way you positioned it too, as new perspective as I got older. You know, it has been a while. So I got into the games industry as like a paid person, like a paid freelancer in 2002, and I was 17, and I was about to go to college, and I did go to college, and I was writing on GameFAQs at the time for a couple of years, just for fun, in high school. And they found me, IGN found me, they offered me a freelance gig. I went to Northeastern for American history, and I was doing that on the side and worked some other jobs. I was an intern at IGN for 2 summers as well. Went to my first E3 in like 2004 or whatever, etc. I graduated from Northeastern in 2007 and was going to start grad school. IGN offered me a job full time, so I took that job instead and left. And I was there full time until the end of 2014. And then, I co-founded Kind of Funny, which still exists today, and did that for about 2 years and change. And like you said, this joke I told on on Twitter that everyone lost their shit on over. It was Day Without a Woman hashtag. You know, hashtags are very important and very serious, so we must always treat them very seriously. And so I just said peace and quiet, and then hashtag A Day Without a Woman. Just a very Al Bundy level joke. I'm not sorry about it. I didn't do anything wrong. I've reached, you know, it's like people are like, why didn't you just apologize? And I'm like, because I'm not going to just apologize and be pushed around. I didn't. Frankly, I said things that would have been much more apology worthy probably before that. You know, whenever something like this happens, you always see people just dumping on you and about how you can't get women. And
Yeah.
You'd never met a woman and all that. I'm like, okay.
Well, a lot of the replies were along those lines at the time.
Right. I'm no longer with the woman I was with at that time anymore, but she was totally fine. She didn't give a shit. And clearly the woman I'm with now, I mean, this was 5 years ago. The woman I'm with now doesn't care either. But yeah, it was a weird situation. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious that it came from multiple angles, in my opinion. The first thing is that I'm pretty outspoken politically, not so much anymore because I think I've been in some way successfully cowed, not because they can hurt me, but because I think that people are like, let's just talk about games when and where we can, and we'll fit in the politics when it makes sense. And so I've kind of been like, okay, yeah, that makes sense to me. But at the same time, I was a pretty outspoken, moderate conservative Republican voter openly. And what was ironic about it was that was clearly Trump broke everyone. And I'm not a Trump voter, but I have no problem with Trump voters, and Trump voters are my family. I'm from Long Island, which voted for Trump twice. So it's not like I'm totally foreign to it, but it broke everyone. And so I think what happened is that I was the closest thing many of these people ever knew to a Trump voter. And so when Trump broke everyone and then things started kind of teetering out of control, and then I told that joke in quotes in March of 2017, I think everyone just kind of said, like, let's just destroy this dude. And you saw it, like you said, you saw it happen in the past. You remember I actually think they wrote a book about this woman, but the woman that told an AIDS joke and then flew to Africa. Do you know what I'm talking about?
It's from the John Ronson book. You've been publicly shamed.
Right, exactly.
She literally got on a plane, and her joke was, "I'm going to Africa. I hope I don't get AIDS. Just kidding. I'm white." So obviously, the premise of the joke there isn't that she genuinely believes only black people can get AIDS. It's actually a meta comment on white privilege and how how isolated from those types of problems white Americans are. I don't see how anybody could interpret that as being racist. And yet by the time her plane landed, her entire life had been destroyed.
Right. Very well put. And I agree. Like, is it ill-timed and probably ill-conceived to say that joke on Twitter? Sure. I don't think people would do that today. But to me, I always think about that moment as an inflection point where I'm like, okay, it's serious now. Now, sometimes people fuck things up and they deserve to be, I don't know, castigated for it in some way. But I don't want anyone, I even talked to Philip Mewson, who was the IGN plagiarist. I did an interview with him a couple of weeks ago. Yeah. No one would talk to that dude. I didn't even say anything. I just let him talk. It's like, what? This is so easy. I'm so surprised that people don't do this more often. But with the political thing, I think it was just time for them to try to get rid of me. And I was pretty unapologetic about it. And so it kind of just caused a sever. And what bothered me about it is not so much that it happened, because frankly, everything's better than it's ever been in my life. And I've had to have ridden those waves to get here. So I don't want to change anything. But I think about the people that kind of threw me away. And I often wonder about what they all think of as I frankly surpassed all of them. Not because I'm necessarily more talented. You might have an opinion on that one way or the other out there, or because I necessarily work harder than other people, although you may have an opinion on that. It's because I just say something different. Like, and I believe it, by the way, but you would think that you would want to seek these voices out and put them forward so that you can sharpen your own sword on those opinions and also give people a little bit of variety.
That's how we used to do it, right?
Right. And so it was weird because kind of funny is it's fine. I don't really give a shit that company wasn't really turning into what I wanted it to be. It's clear that it's not what I thought it was going to be. What I have is what I wanted. And I'm happy about that. But I think about being thrown away by IGN is especially peculiar because everyone there knew what, and I'm not trying to be a dickhead, but I was the most popular editor there. I did have the most traffic. Everyone can see that. In fact, Per Schneider told me well after a year that I left IGN that I was still in the top 10 traffic daily because my old my old pieces were still getting traffic. You would think you would just look at that from just an economic point of view and be like, well, that's a viewpoint that people want to hear from.
Yeah.
And I recently told Per that I'm like, your company, because I have a very good relationship with him still. And I looked at him as a father figure to me. He never did anything to me. In fact, he gave me my opportunity, but I'm like, do you realize how unlikable your staff is? Like, do you realize how completely unlikable they are? That like no one is going in with the exception of Ryan McCaffrey and Damon Hatfield, like no one really gives a shit. And I look at Kotaku sometimes, like they keep hiring these people. And I'm like, who are these people? Why are you hiring these people? Your site is dying. So I think I'm just going on and on to say that I think it was a way to homogenize things. And ultimately it worked on their part, but it was our gain, my gain, and people like you and others who weren't doing anything wrong other than just giving different opinions. And so that's really what went down. And I feel like that's pretty transparent at this point if you just go back and look. And I agree with you. One of the great overreactions of all time. And
for sure.
And that is what it is. I mean, again, it's no offense, it's their loss. I don't need that in my life. I need to be myself. And when I know I'm not doing anything wrong and you're asking me to apologize and you know I did nothing wrong, that's a bridge too far for me.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree with that. And, you know, I don't want to pontificate too much on cancel culture. I almost feel that's become blasé. And the people who don't believe that it's a real phenomenon, I just don't think they interface with reality at the moment. Like a lot of people don't. As you said, you know, the Trump phenomenon has broken a lot of people's brains, and Trump's gone and their brains remain broken. So we're still kind of seeing where everything's going to fall. But there's one aspect of it I did want to explore that is unique to you. And it's one of the things that I think is particularly insidious about this. And it's where, you know, all the, again, trite comparisons to Salem and the witch hunts kind of do ring true. And that is that what these journalists do, because they have these huge platforms and influence within an industry you to operate in, potentially meeting sponsors or publishers who are coming from US academia and are very like-minded to them, they put pressure on people that absolutely would never renounce you or denounce you through a sort of channel that is unique. It's not a social thing. It's an economic thing, and essentially the threat is economic desolation if you continue to work with this individual. And so I wanted to ask you about that, because that to me, it seems to be the most hurtful aspect of this. Some dickhead saying something about a joke I made on Twitter and trying to cancel me, calling me a Nazi or whatever, like, fucking have at that. But when you come after people I care about, as they did in your case, IGN, and turn the screws on them, that's why I think this type of behavior is evil.
Yeah, I agree. First of all, I mean, very well said again. And I agree with what you said at the top. It is very weird when people pretend that cancel culture doesn't exist. Are we really going to sit here and pretend that that's
wild?
True? There are certain things where I think where I've gotten to in my own mind, just generally speaking, is you either want to be lied to or you don't. You can either use your own eyeballs and your ears or you don't. Use them. Sometimes you're going to come on one conclusion or the other, on one side of the spectrum or the other. It doesn't matter. But when you see things and you say, no, that's not happening, like it happened to me. So yeah, it does happen. I mean, I'm telling you, it happens. You can believe it or not, but it does happen. So I'm very glad you brought that up, because I find that frustrating. Although I think you're right too, that this conversation in some way has become trite for many people, and I respect that as well. But
yeah, it's just it becomes essentially like a lot of these things. It's so divided into believers and non-believers. The only people that even entertain the conversation in the first place are the people that agree with you. So it becomes moot to even, you know, go into the topic, I think.
Right. You're absolutely right. And it's strange because with the cancellation thing and kind of going after people's money and all of that, I find it incredibly insidious. It's going to the point where it's like, are you going to go after people's banks? Are you going to go after people? You know, PayPal obviously is turning the screws on people. And are you just going to, like, what is the point? What is the goal? You're even seeing it now. I mean, not to get too political, I guess we will, but with COVID, I mean, I've gotten vaccinated. I have no problem with the vaccine, but it's certainly weird that so many people that are talking about universal health care are the ones that seem to want people to go to the ER with COVID and be triaged and thrown into a closet. Very weird, right? Yeah. So when you see things like this, it's like, well, we are detached from reality a little bit. And in order to fight back against it, the only thing that we can really do is just stand our ground. And I think what the people that were around me expected me to do was to, because they knew me for a long time, is that they expected me to be like, all right, Colin will just go on and fix this. And I was like, no, in fact, I'm not doing this anymore. And I'll leave my own company in order to make the point that I don't want to bring anyone else down with me. It's my own, because I could still own 20% of Kind of Funny. They would have had to force me to sell it, right? I sold it back, not under duress, but I was just like, I'll sell it back at a fair market price. And I did. Because I wanted to make my own choice and finally stand up to what I thought was a real growing totalitarianism and a really weird homogenization of things and an othering of people too. And you know what, Richard, I think the reason that I survived is, well, there might be multiple reasons, but I think the big reason is that I went immediately and I was like, I didn't do anything to anyone. Go ahead and ask anyone that I've ever worked with if
Yep.
I've ever said something mean or I ever treated someone the wrong way or anything. Like, you think, I'm like, go ahead, ask women, go ask any of my bosses. Go. I have copious IGN peer reviews from quarter after quarter after quarter after quarter written by the very people that later denounced me. And I'll release those one day because I think it'll be funny to see that. Like to see like all the tweets they said, but then see when we work together, like the glowing shit they used to say about me, right? And so I really just think it's a transparent political thing. IGN made the choice not to back me. In fact, I tried to use IGN's podcast studio like a year later, and they were like, "You're not really welcome here." And I'm like, I worked for you for 12 years. That's the people that are there are meaningless to the success of IGN. I'm probably one of the most meaningful people that have ever worked there as far as the importance. And again, you have to, I know this comes off as braggadocious sometimes, but when no one else is going to tell the real story about what you contributed and what you did and try to write you out of all the things you did, then you have to stand up for yourself. And that's a whole other thing, right? Like Podcast Beyond was like biggest when I was doing it. And I'm not even, it's pretended like I didn't even do the show at all. So it becomes a frustrating thing. And I really do believe that it's so silly for these dying websites to say like, oh, we don't want to speak to them at all. And our editors are going to openly hate them and castigate them. And we're going to write weird frankly, borderline anti-Semitic things on IGN. And we're going to kowtow to Chinese companies like that game Fanbyte company that's owned by Tencent. It's the funniest thing ever. And I'm just like, I don't need to be part of this anymore. And you isolating me so much from it made me more popular. And I don't know when you're going to realize that you made a mistake, not about me, but about people like me. And so I think, I don't know if that answers the question, but I think that kind of explains the scenario in which it all happened. And I'm glad that we're of the same mind, because you saw it over in the UK with Brexit and, before the snap election, but when Theresa May was first elected and all of the rest. And it's like, how often are you going to figure out that Twitter and the internet and the people yelling at you and stuff don't reflect reality? They don't even reflect the listenership. It's very weird. And only listening to people that say things is very weird, and not listening to the numbers.
Well, essentially, I've always thought about it this way. The big shift has been that what were once traditional gaming sites and games media with a games focus have essentially become the exact opposite. Now you have your YouTube channels and your podcasts and your subreddits for actual gaming culture and nerd culture, which again, I don't really like that term, but whatever. The sites that used to cater to that, because they've been failing for so long, their only strategy, it seems to be, is to embrace the exact opposite. And so I look at that now, and I look at their audience, and they're all of a similar mindset. They all repeat the same lies and fabrications. It's anti-gaming culture is what those, whatever the hell that means in their mind. I couldn't really testify. But
it is anti-gamer, right? It's so weird.
Yeah. Well, Kotaku's planted the flag in the soil very much. I mean, you did a tweet the other day where you said, they've assembled the all-star team of fucking awful journalists. And, I mean, listen, I am a guy, I'll break bread across enemy lines. I really liked Stephen Totillo. I thought he did a fantastic job in keeping that site alive. Unfortunately, and I'm sure he'd admit this over drinks in a bar, he had to embrace that dark side, because that, unfortunately, was the only audience they had left.
Yeah, it's true. And yeah, Totillo was one of the ones that were like, I have like a fucking deep feud with some people at Kotaku. They've lied about me so much. I can't wait for that site to go away. I don't celebrate anyone's joblessness except for the motherfuckers that would tweet things at me and make fun of me and celebrate my attempted destruction, all that. They can all go fuck themselves. I remember every one of them, and I will be there. Ethan Gach, when you get laid off, trust me, I'll be there. It is true, because we were talking about the pie pieces, right? And they've made their pieces so small that, and everyone's satiated elsewhere, that they've ruined their own business models.
Yeah.
And I don't care if they bandy around. I mean, first of all, the websites don't even bother bandying around this bullshit anymore. Like, our traffic's better than ever. Yeah, sure it is. But it's also just, again, with Patricia Hernandez running Kotaku right now, which is a fucking weird choice. But the hiring they're making, it's like, what are you doing? Do you care at all about video game culture? Do you care at all about reaching people that play games? That's why I try to tell my audience, there is no political litmus test with us. I don't care. I don't care what you do. I don't care who you vote for. I don't care what your party is. And none of it matters. We just want to enjoy ourselves, have real serious conversations. And when they get political, which they will, because this is an industry that is economic and social and all of those things, then let's have reasonable, fair conversations. That's all that the audience should demand. And if you can't reach that small and low hurdle that you can just step over very easily, that a fucking toddler can step over, then you've really and truly lost the plot. And so for all the Totillos and the Per Schneiders and the people out there that do good work, they've allowed themselves to get inundated and killed basically by, provocateurs that have come after. And it's so strange because, in America, we have a proud tradition of conspiracy theory.
Oh, yeah.
And it almost is a thing where we all embrace it, but we also, in the back of our minds, are like, well, it can't possibly be true. Like we embrace it and we say it can't be true at the same time, the moon landing or whatever the case might be. And then things happen where you're just like, wow, it isn't a conspiracy. They really do hire each other. They really do lie. Yeah. They really do have friends that they protect in PR and in dev. They have endemic conflicts with money and companies. And remember the Kotaku that gladly got blacklisted by Sony, gladly got blacklisted by Ubisoft, gladly got blacklisted by Bethesda for doing real journalism? A far cry, pardon the pun, from what we're seeing right now. And so I feel bad for the audience. Again, people like you, people like me, and many others. I mean, there are lots of other people that are doing it, Giant Bomb and others that have their own audiences. It's just, you would think you would look around if you were one of these companies and be really scared and not double down on what's killing you. If I were at IGN, I would fire most of the staff. I mean, I've said that publicly. If they were like, Colin, you are the editor in chief of IGN right now, I'd be like, that's fine. I mean, most of you are going. We're starting again, and no one has the balls or the audacity or the courage, but they don't realize that there's no audience loyalty. And in fact, you might gain a bigger audience if you did something like that. So.
Yeah. Well, I look at it this way. And again, I've been an editor and run publications and everything else. And so, one of the things you'll do is you're looking at the metrics, you're looking at what's popular, but also as well, kind of in the same way, if you're making a movie, it doesn't have to be a box office blockbuster every time. It has to have some sort of artistic merit, The big studios operate like this. You get a Michael Bay movie, and then you get something really, the Safdie brothers, you get something nice and artistic, and it's not going to do big numbers, but it's going to give you critical acclaim, maybe a bit of Oscar bait. And unfortunately, these websites, the editors don't seem to balance the buffet of what the critique used to be. And that is that, I'm all for a feminist perspective on video games. I'm all for viewing going back and retrospectively looking at a game and the political environment within which that game is created. I think there's huge value in that. And I think that's actually essential to treating the medium with the respect it deserves. If it's 100% of your output, and I can't go to your website and find out if a game runs at 60 or 30 fucking FPS, you have failed. You have failed me as a consumer. You have failed me as a reader. You have failed me as a gamer. And so, that's the problem I think they have. You need to keep one or two of these crackpots, they often are, on to write that type of stuff. But if it's your entire output, you are going to swirl down the toilet. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, I think it's very well said, because there's a lack of fortitude, right, of this constitution of saying we have to make hard changes that are maybe even going to include some of ourselves or some of the way we think about things. And I'm totally with you. I've been saying this for many years. Politics belongs in games. Social issues belong in games. The creation of gaming is political. The creation of gaming is social and economic. I own a studio. I mean, it is, right? And that's just how it goes. But what it reminds me of is all the shit that's happening in the States with Afghanistan the last few weeks, where Joe Biden is like, what do you want me to do? You want us to stay in Afghanistan for 20 more years? And I'm like, and everyone's like, Joe, no one's saying that. No one says that, Joe. No one wants to stay there. We just have a problem with how we were leaving. And it's a similar obfuscation argument in gaming, where they say like, these chud motherfuckers don't want politics in games. And it's like, no, they didn't say that. No one's saying that. What they're saying is that when they click on a story about Far Cry 6, they don't want to hear about how it's racist. Only. They want to also hear about the game and maybe give it even a benefit of the doubt, right? Remember what happened with Far Cry 5? I've brought this up before, but people are so fucking stupid that they didn't realize that Far Cry 5 and the enemy in that is a reference to, events that happened at Waco.
Yeah.
And David Koresh. The enemy looks like David Koresh, guys. He's wearing the David Koresh glasses. And all you saw was like, why isn't this game about Trump voters?
Yep.
And I'm like, because it's about a religious cult based on the 90s. And
all it takes is a little bit of intelligence, right? To extrapolate this idea of like cultishness and how it's a bad thing and they're the enemy. And then you can go and apply that to exactly what we're looking at in society today, this tribalism. And yet they didn't do that. They said, why aren't these people wearing red baseball caps? Because I want to mow them down with a machine gun.
Right, exactly. And that's true. But like also, how did no one in the chain of events, right, of saying like, oh, we're sending an associate editor to UB to write this game. Then it comes back, they write their little piece. Maybe that's what it's about. It floats up to the previews editor and the editor-in-chief has to clear it and they title it and all of that. And no one along the way says, hey, man, maybe he's 22 or 23-year-old. He's a young kid. He's like, this guy is supposed to be David Koresh. Go look him up. And first of all, put the picture of the enemy and David Koresh next to each other and you realize that it's a literal carbon copy. And then read a little bit about what happened with the Branch Davidians and all of that. And then you'll be able to use real information about what the game is clearly about. No, so it's not that you should necessarily inherently know that, but no one knew that. Like in the entire ecosystem, no one had anything to say about that. I found that incredibly weird. And I think it illustrates, even though it was back a couple of years ago now, it illustrates, because we're seeing it with Far Cry 6 now, the fake Cuba that they're doing in that. And we're seeing that again, where it's like, why don't you play the game and see what the intent is and give it a fair shake? Ubisoft is not, what are they, fucking neo-Nazis? They're a French and Canadian team full of mostly very liberal people. I mean, who do you think is writing this stuff? It doesn't even make any sense. And that's why I think gamers should expect more. It's not that they shouldn't expect political commentary, which is very valuable. And I agree. I mean, I've written 2 games and they're both political games. They're allegories, but they're political games. And then say like, well, that's one piece of the puzzle. I remember when I wrote about, you remember Borderlands 2 girlfriend mode? Remember that fiasco?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So I wrote at IGN, for people that don't know, that it was during Borderlands 2, a developer just said like, oh, we made like an easy co-op. It was like some co-op thing. And he's like, oh, it's like kind of like girlfriend mode. And everyone's like, what? Gas, like what? Can't call it girlfriend mode. And I'm like, do you really think that guy meant to ruin his life that way? Or do you think maybe he just misspoke? And so I wrote an editorial about that. And what was cool about that IGN was that then Lucy O'Brien wrote an editorial that disagreed with it. And we published them at the same time. Can you believe that? And like nothing like that would ever happen. I will shit bricks if I ever went to Kotaku and read something that was from an evangelical Christian or I don't know, something like that, just a different opinion. So it's not only that it's become homogenized, it's that like we don't even try to say like, what do you believe? What do you think, audience? Instead, they try to hammer these things in. And again, it goes back to that Philip Mewson interview where it's like, Philip Mewson's a plagiarist. I told him to his face he doesn't belong in the industry. I don't need to hold that back to him from him. But what does he have to say? He can speak for himself, and then you can figure it out. You're an adult. And I tweeted this out recently, Richard. I was like, I am so glad that my audience are just well-balanced adults because they just get it. They get it. And that just gives me a lot of hope that there are many content creators out there that can continue to fill these niches as we do, just in a small way ourselves.
Yeah. So I've got some examples because one of the things that does come up a lot is this framing that, oh, you like you said, you don't like the politics in your video games or your video game critique because, you've got this incredible privileged lifestyle and you don't want to hear about problems around the world. So I've picked some examples of some of the worst journalism, I think. And I'm going to read you little extracts of them.
Okay, please.
And I just want to see if you can find a world with your editorial brain where this is appropriate. So this is from a Kotaku review of the PlayStation 5, written by Ian Walker. A terrible
He's
writer.
Awful. He is one of the. How did they assemble such a team there?
Oh, it's unbelievable. It is unbelievable. But I've had the great displeasure to meet him in person several times, and he is. Well, we won't get into that. But anyway, He says in a review of PlayStation 5, I'd be remiss to ignore all the reasons not to be excited for the PlayStation 5. The world is still reeling under the weight of the COVID-19 pandemic. There are more Americans out of work right now than at any point in the country's history, with no relief in sight. Our healthcare system is an inherently evil institution that forces people to ration life-saving medications like insulin and choose suicide over suffering with untreated mental illnesses. And as I'm writing this, it looks very likely that Joe Biden will be our next president. But it's clear that the worst people aren't going to go away just because a new old white man is sitting behind the Resolute desk, at least not this old white man. Our government is fundamentally broken in a way that necessitates radical change rather than incremental electoralism. What about the PlayStation, bro? Like, for real?
Yeah, what the fuck are you talking about? Now, I think it is super interesting, and I think historically relevant to say this console launched during COVID. Definitely. Like,
exactly.
we'll always...
There's so many ways you can explore that topic without that.
Right, definitely. Manufacture, working from home, and the difficulty. I mean, I think it's actually an amazing thing. I don't think Sony should have even released the console last year. I think they should have just released it this year. But nonetheless, the fact that they did it all is an amazing economic, corporate, social, organizational story. And that could be part of the review too, you know, but that signals to me what people have said for a long time. And I think it's true. It's like, man, games journalists, a lot of games journalists are just, they want to be another kind of journalist, and they can't. So what they do is they just shoehorn anything they want. That would have gotten a big red X at IGN and just removed from the review when I was there, for sure. I mean, I wouldn't even try to do anything like that. And yeah, that's it. I mean, Ian Walker is, I don't understand how bad you can get at a job. And it's just, I'm not trying to be, I don't care about disrespecting these guys because they have no problem disrespecting me.
Oh, of course.
It's just that review is famous. I mean, that review gets circulated to this day because it's infamous, because it's trash. You want to read about, now I'm not much of a technical person, as my audience knows, but it's like, you know, what, it's just so funny because you can imagine it's like, you know, and the teraflops are this and the RAM is this, and then it's like, and then going on and on about anti-fascism for 500 words. It's like, what are you doing? What are you doing? And what are you saying? So I'm glad he wrote that review, just because it's it'll be circulated
I would
forever.
literally use that, you know, because I do lectures now that I'm old. I do guest lectures. That's a fantastic example of where your editorializing has absolutely no place whatsoever in a piece.
And that's where you need an editor. You need an editor, and you needed a clear-eyed editor, a copy editor, and an editor-in-chief that's like, let me check my shit at the door. You know, in 2012, when I supported Mitt Romney, you're not going to go find all the 2012 reviews I wrote at IGN, and it's going to say like, by the way, you really got to vote for Mitt Romney. It's like, this has nothing to do with anything. It doesn't matter. That's and see, that goes back to what I was saying about the whole Biden, like, Afghanistan thing and the obfuscation. It's the same thing where they're like, see, these motherfuckers don't want politics. They don't care. And it's like, no, dude, we just want relevant, salient political points and messages and the things you're saying. And you see that. Do you know Richard Hogue, by chance? Rick Hogue, the lawyer?
Yeah,
he's great. And he works with us sometimes, but it's so funny, like, because he constantly pierces holes in all these people's just half-assed, they don't know anything, you know, like, it's sad. I don't understand how you have to buff out and pad out your word count, which is such nonsense, and how it just gets through all your, like, and that your ownership is cool with that. I mean, oh man, Kotaku's in trouble.
Yeah, well, Variety did what I think is possibly the worst piece of video games journalism I've ever read. It was their review of The Division 2. I made a whole separate video about this by a chap called Matt Paprocki, and I'll just read you these paragraphs and you can tell me what you think.
Okay.
The Division 2 does have plenty of elements aligned with typical Clancy fiction. It's fetishistic about weapons. There are small elements of political intrigue and absurdity. One side mission concerns the Declaration of Independence's rescue. The setting is Washington, D.C., and the president may or may not be dead. But then comes the wave of Tucker Carlson. And this is the whole premise of the article. They just wanted to talk about Tucker Carlson for some reason.
Right, exactly.
Carlson's hyper-conservative news shows treats white men as victims, said gun laws represent class warfare on the day of a school shooting, and treats Republicans positively as ferocious tigers. Carlson's rants appear to have inadvertently birthed this world of Division 2. So, and on and on and on it goes.
That's so weird too, because first of all, the original Division predates Carlson's new rise. Remember, Carlson is, first of all, Tucker Carlson, if you want to be factual, has had like 3 different careers in TV. So this newest one of like where he is mega famous is not from that era, from the original Division era. So to say that the impetus of the sequel is, it just doesn't even make any sense. And again, let's just keep in mind who made it. You know, again, it's not War Horse Studios or some fucking Polish team. It's a French Canadian team.
Yeah.
So probably pretty liberal. But yeah, it's nonsense. It's total nonsense. And I'm glad you brought up Variety, because obviously games are not the only vertical in which this is happening and people are complaining about it. It's happening in a major way in fandom, as you know, with entertainment verticals, but especially with Star Wars and things like that. Then it's happening with TV shows and film and DC and Marvel stuff, especially. The nerdier, I think, the more niche the coverage required. But you have to wonder, right, Richard? I mean, I think about this too, and I've always thought about this. Like, who is that for?
Yeah.
Like, who are you talking to? That's the weird thing to me. I always tried to read the things that I wrote and try to be like, well, I have an opinion here and I'm going to tell you about it, but like, this is for you to think about. It's not to talk down to you. I don't ever want people to walk away and be like, well, like, you can read that Variety piece and, well, like, they don't like me. I watch Tucker Carlson. Does that make me a bad person? I don't think it does, but maybe someone thinks that. But why would you throw me away because of that? And throw away my opinion or my viewpoint, my page view, my possible ad click, my possible subscription? Just from an economic point of view, in some way, you have to kind of respect it, because it is so self-defeating that they're just going to destroy themselves. But at the same time, you have to just picture how lonely a world must be in which you can't imagine any other opinion but your own. And that's not a world I come from. I mean, my mom's a Democrat, my dad's a Republican. Like, my sisters are Democrats, my brother's kind of a moderate. I'm more of a conservative. Like, my girlfriend is very liberal. I've never had these kinds of problems except for in the games industry. And
yeah, it's really weird how, you know, the prevailing sentiment, it's almost like a fealty test, a loyalty test, and it's so dogmatic and so doctrinal that it's not even that, because, you know, I'm ostensibly a liberal. I think, you know, I was a member of the Socialist Workers' Party when I was young, grew out of that, thankfully, you know, but I still believe in, you know, bodily autonomy, gay rights, trans rights. I'd legalize all drug use tomorrow. You know, I believe in free healthcare. I don't think I could get invited to like a conservative, you know, party to get up and speak. I think they would find a lot of my ideas to be against their ideas. And yet I am told I'm a rare example of a conservative in the gaming space. And I'm like, no, I don't. First, I don't think you understand what conservatism is. And second of all, I don't think you realize how many liberals find your brand of American progressivism, with all its hysteria and nonsense, to be thoroughly repellent. And it's got nothing in common with me, a European, at all. Like, what's going on in Berkeley, you know, they couldn't come to where I grew up in a mining community and sit in a working men's club for 5 minutes. They would be appalled and upset. But that's what I understand to be the liberal working class.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. And it's funny because Danny O'Dwyer, who I'm sure you know, who's completely gone off the deep end. I don't know what happened to that guy. He used to be great. I knew him in person.
It's the same thing happens to all of them. They're so afraid. They just want to be left alone. So they swear fealty and please don't hurt me and don't cancel me and don't take my things away, because they don't have the confidence that if they did take their things away, they could do what you did and build your own thing.
Yeah. Meanwhile, and Danny O'Dwyer, of course, did way worse things than I ever said. Danny O'Dwyer was dropping N-bombs on Twitter. No one seems to care about that. But I bring him up only because I once got into an argument with him where I was like, Danny, you grew up in Ireland. I grew up on Long Island. I grew up in a pretty multicultural town with especially a lot of Black people. I'm like, Danny, do you think that I have more in common with you because I'm white? Or do you think I have more in common with the Black guy that grew up down the street from me that I went to school with? And he was like mortified that I even asked that. And I'm like, well, that says everything to me. You're so fucking stupid that you think that you and me are more in common because we share skin color, even though you grew up in another country on another continent. You think that I have more in common with you than the guy down the street who I went to high school with.
Yeah.
I mean, you're a fucking idiot if you think that. I'm sorry. Like, I don't know.
No, it's true.
I don't know how else to put it. And so when you reduce things to immutably like that, and you just say like, well, all that matters, like I was reading the new Kotaku hired a new guy, and so I went to his Twitter account, and it's like black, bisexual, gay, whatever. And I'm like, I don't care. Who are you? These things don't matter to me. I don't care.
These are the labels we used to try and get away from when I was a young lefty. We wanted to break down the need for labels.
Right.
Exactly.
And now it's said like, oh, everyone being equal is racist. And I'm like, what? Like, I remember a time when that was like everything. I mean, I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and I was telling people recently, like, because again, I grew up in such, New York's so multicultural just inherently that I never thought twice about having Black or Hispanic friends growing up. The first time I ever really thought that it might be weird is when an adult told me in college that it's unusual to grow up in a place like that. And I'm like, I don't think so. Like, I didn't think twice about having a Black kid over for dinner, or my best friend still is Hispanic. My girlfriend's Black right now. I don't care. They're not pieces. They're not pawns. They're humans. And we need to be able to speak in such a way that I think raises up their individuality and lessens the things that separate us. And I always remember that Danny O'Dwyer conversation, because I'm like, Danny, like, you are way stupider than I ever thought. I mean, I mean that with all due respect, but I thought you were like really one of the smart ones. And like you said, it could be a performative thing, and it might be with him, but I find it really concerning based on the conversation we were having earlier about reality, wherein we're so focused on the things that seem easy that we're unwilling to get to the nitty gritty of the individual and like what it means to be colorblind, what it means to, because I'm with you. I've actually often made the argument, Richard, that I think pro-gay marriage is conservative. I think pro-choice is conservative because they're the anti-government, anti-control messages.
Yeah.
But it's concerning to me too, because I feel like I've become more liberal as I've gotten older. I used to be much more conservative than I am now. And I look to the other side and I'm like, I'm eager to have meaningful debate and conversation about some ideas I've been exploring on my own. Like, what does universal healthcare look like? I'm not so opposed to it anymore. Like, what does poverty reduction look like in the United States, or higher taxes on richer individuals and all of that? And the other side hates me so much just by proxy of my conservatism, I guess, that they won't even acknowledge my humanity. So we can't even have those conversations.
Yeah.
And so that only hurts them, because my big fear in the United States, if anything, is that like they thought Trump was this dangerous dude. And I really always said, he's not smart enough. He's not savvy enough. He's not sophisticated enough.
Exactly.
You want to see a Donald Trump with an Oxford degree and a brain, then keep going, because that's what's going to happen. And I would rather see something wherein we put away the things that what I consider trivial differences between us, the skin color. Like, I'm American by birth and I'm really proud of that, but I was just born here. I'm real proud of the system, but it doesn't make me better than anyone else. It doesn't make me better than the guy that was born in Somalia, because that's where he was born. Our society is definitely superior though. And we should be proud to say that and hoist that up and say that it's the multiculturalism that helps doing that, but it's also the individualism and all the other things. So in other words, no one wants to have these hard conversations, just binary, left or right. And I just don't fit, and you don't fit, and others don't fit in that binary. Because it's so funny, like, these people don't speak for the working class. I also come from a working class blue collar background. My dad's a New York City firefighter. They would laugh at these motherfuckers. They don't want anything to do with these people, So
this is how kind of pernicious it is as well, because I lived in America for close to 6 years, working on a TV show out there. And I lived on the East Coast and the West Coast. I lived in Atlanta and I lived in Vegas. And as you know, Vegas has an influx of all the California refugees now who are fleeing the stakes. They can't afford to live there anymore. So I brushed up against people from all different backgrounds, all different socioeconomic groups, all different political viewpoints. By the way, off Twitter, never had a singular issue where anything I've said or joked about has ever been deemed to be outrageous. But one thing has always stuck in my mind. I had a dear friend, and still a dear friend, obviously. And we were out drinking one night, and this is a person of color. There's again, that's an appropriate label apparently, which blows my mind.
Yeah, didn't we? That used to be like inappropriate.
That was hardcore racism 20 years ago. So I remember that term rankles every time I say it. But anyway, we were having a nice heart-to-heart talk about everything we'd been through. And they said to me, you know what, you're such a good ally. And that cut me to the core. That was like a really hurtful statement. They thought they were paying me a huge compliment, but I thought we were friends, you know? And suddenly you realize that even in good, healthy relationships, that type of signifier, that type of qualifier, it erodes relationships on a foundational level that you might not even be cognizant of. And it's just so poisonous to human interaction.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that is sad. I've had a similar situation too, where the current toxicity and expectations of conversation made their way into a relationship where it never was before. And we had to be real cognizant to remove that. And it took time. Like we had to be like, we can't, this is not what we are. Like that we're not going to go down this divisive road. We never went down this road. And the situation doesn't even demand it. And yeah, it's funny how language has changed so much, because I remember that too. I also remember like it used to be awesome to like talk about Martin Luther King's dream of a colorless society.
Yeah.
That's considered racist now. I mean, can you imagine like Martin Luther King is now basically, his message is racist, I guess. I don't know, but
yeah,
it is very, well, let me back up. I'll say this, that like people look at hiring as an example of like, well, you got to hire equitably. You got to hire in such a way that it lifts certain people up. And I'm like, no, we'll hire for talent. And what ends up happening in our case is that we have overrepresentation of Black men and Black women with 1 and 1 in our small group based on per capita population of the United States. So in fact, by going after talent, we overrepresent in that case a specific minority group, which is just an example of why stupid shit like that doesn't matter to me. And it's funny, Chris always talks about this. Ray Gunn, who's my co-host on Sacred Symbols, my PlayStation podcast, where he's Puerto Rican, he's Hispanic, but he's like, sometimes he says it, he laments it. He's like, sometimes I'm treated white when it's convenient for people, and I'm treated like Hispanic when it's convenient.
Well, yeah, they're Schrodinger's person of color, right? You know, they've got the nightmare of whenever it's statistically convenient to put you in with the white folk, they do that, and whenever it's convenient, you know, if you want to be Latinx, they put you in with their shit.
It's unbelievable. That, first of all, that term is just an unbelievable.
Oh, mind blowing. Got friends in Florida from a Latino and Latina background. They fucking despise it, bro.
Like it's just these are gendered languages. There's nothing you can do about it, and there's nothing you should want to do about it either, because it's so. I don't want to get down that road. I fucking hate that word. I hate it.
I think everyone does. I mean, that to me is the ultimate. If anyone unironically uses that, you know, I know we've talked about unity and healing. I'd be tempted to just discount that person as having any potential for interaction at all. It's such a ridiculous term. There's absolutely no need for it to exist.
No, I agree.
It's openly offensive to the group it's supposed to help.
Right, and it's just like many things. It goes back into what you were saying about the performative nature of things. It's just for the person saying it. It's not for the target. I mean, Jesus Christ, we're talking about, no offense. If you're trans or have gender dysphoria, that's your prerogative. I mean, I don't want anything to do with your personal choices, but we're almost making these decisions as if half of the United States or half of the world is transgender. Like just obliterating language, obliterating norms and expectations, and birthing people, and you know, it's like, what the fuck? Like, why can't we just be normal again and just talk like human beings to each other and say, like, you're a trans woman and you're a Black man and and we're all the same. We're all gonna be
from my perspective as well. I don't know if you feel this, but I actually think a lot of that stuff is very counterproductive, because I've had a lot of trans friends, including someone that was very dear to me that's, you know, no longer here anymore. And we lived together for a long period of time. I became very aware of the problems that trans people face and the prejudices and, you know, issues around the practicality of healthcare and aftercare, hormone treatment. So it really broadened my horizons to it. And it opened up a whole new world to me, because I'll be honest, you know, I'm a bisexual dude. That grew up at a time when bisexuals were more evil than any gay could be. We were the ones that brought AIDS into the straight community, if you believed the narrative. So you had to be on high alert. Like, if you were gay, a big guy might go, okay, more women for me, fuck that, you know, weirdo or whatever. But as a bisexual, you were considered to be especially dangerous. So I kind of cloaked a lot of my, I was a big butch guy, played a lot of sports. I was able to kind of walk among them without anyone ever thinking I was another. But, that was at a time when trans people were really sort of coming out, and it was becoming this, this actual thing rather than just an offshoot. And I think, first of all, the gay community and just the straight community didn't serve trans people by taking the LGB societies at universities and making them LGBT societies.
Yes.
That to me was like, let's stick all the others in one group. And I used to say to trans friends back then, it's like, our experiences aren't really all that common. The only thing we really have in common is that we have to hide aspects of ourselves from the broader public, from a motivation of fear. But anyway, I've said, most trans people I know, here's what they want. They want to get the healthcare they need to lead the life that they want to lead, which is to pass in society without being hated and despised by evil-minded bigots and people who they try and cloak their hatred and harassment, with this benevolent, I'm doing it because I care about you. I'm doing it because you're mentally ill and I want to help. It's all a fad. It's a sham rather. But unfortunately, what happens is the quiet life many trans people crave is disrupted by these really loud, aggressive activists that turn off the public. And all my trans friends are going, oh my God, that fucking idiot doesn't speak for me, and now I'm getting abused on social media because of this person or that person. And, that hardcore lunatic fringe, I wish they could see you're not doing any favors for the people you claim to care about. And I know that from firsthand experience, you're harming the people you profess to want to help, by and large. Not always, but in my experience, that's true.
I think you're right. I think that's just the downfall of intersectional activism, where you try to just, any downtrodden person must have an intersectional connection to some other downtrodden person. It just doesn't make any sense. And I've always felt that lesbian, gay, and bi people clearly, like you said, have they have a common thing here. And then trans people don't have a common thing with them. They're trans. So that's their own situation that they have to deal with on their own. And I agree with you. I think in the interactions I've had with trans folks in my life, they all want to just be left alone and pass, I guess is what the term would be, or at least be respected as making their decisions. And I think that by activists going like, yeah, men can have babies and breastfeed. And I was even seeing something about bisexuality being redefined lately. And it's funny that you brought it up, and other things. And I'm like, you're just hurting yourselves.
I'm a not doing now anything. If I choose to date a woman over a man because I have straight passing privilege.
Right. It's you can't win. That's why it's just better to not even participate. This snake will eat itself. It's eating itself every day. It doesn't mean that the snake's not ever going to kill itself, or it's not going to bloat, because of course it is. But playing this game immediately sets you at risk of being eaten by the snake, which is why I just don't even play it. From my perspective, it's like, listen, man, do whatever you want. Don't hurt anyone else. Respect property and law. And otherwise, I don't care what you do. I'm a huge proponent of legalization of sex work, of legalization of drug consumption, legalization, or at least decriminalization of those things. And, I'm also for higher taxes on rich people. I'm also for, like I said, the investigation of things like universal health care and what I would like to call the privileges of elite society or rich society. Like, can a rich society give you free college? Can a rich society? So like, why can't we explore those things that benefit all of us instead of just diminishing everyone and reducing everyone to these small groups? And it's like I said, it's not that trans people, the smallest minority is the individual. So it's not that trans people don't deserve respect and protection. Of course they do. But it is strange that it is such an outsized topic when it is 0.3% of the world population. And we're talking about it like it is, you could conceivably go through your entire life without really even knowing you saw or interacted with a trans person. So, so that's the whole point, is like, that's why I'm such a classist as opposed to anything else, where I'm like, class is the problem. Money is the problem. Taxes are the problem. Inequality with finance is the problem. All of these other things are distractions that seek to divide us, because the Appalachian guy in West Virginia who's white is just as poor as the guy in the black guy in Watts. And that is their connection to each other.
Absolutely. So back to journalism. You were somewhat optimistic over the course of this conversation, where you said, you think the serpent will eat itself, and that you feel these publications will go under. Unfortunately, the phenomenon I'm observing is that what used to be like games journalism was essentially, and no disrespect to the good ones, but it, by and large, it wasn't. They weren't sending their best, let's say.
No, I agree.
It was a bunch of bloggers that necessarily didn't care for the topic, that were thinking, if I just get good at games journalism and climb to the top of this tiny hill, I might be able to ascend to something a bit more serious. And I think that's why so many of the articles contain this almost frustrated, impotent political writing, because they'd rather be doing that, but they can't. They lack the talent, the connections, etc. But one of the problems we've had is there's been a massive decline in journalistic standards over the last 10 years, just in the mainstream media in the US in particular. And we're now starting to see journalists from this awful blogosphere that got treated with credibility suddenly overnight because they just happen to be cheap. And they're now ascending into those positions that we used to mock and say, you will never work for the New York Times. Now you've got Ben from BuzzFeed at the New York Times. You'll never work for the Washington Post. Nathan Grayson at the Washington Post. Sure, he's still writing about games, but considering that guy is patient fucking zero for ethical violations in journalism, it's staggering to me that these people, in my opinion, have seemed to fail upward. And I think they're going to contribute to this ongoing issue, which is journalists don't want to tell their audience the truth and present facts objectively. They want to use their platforms as essentially bully pulpits to make everybody a better person. And I think we're going to see that continue. I'm actually not optimistic.
Yeah, I think I should probably differentiate that. I don't think I'm optimistic that the situation as it stands will reconstitute itself or become better. In other words, I do think Kotaku's done. Like, I think that the writing's on the wall for these sites. I think the bigger sites will survive based on SEO and scraping and all of that, IGN, GameSpot. I think those sites will survive. But I think the mid-tier sites that used to have the most respect, right? Remember, like, The Escapist back in the day is an example of that. Or Kotaku, certainly Polygon, and those others. I just think the writing's on the wall. They're not worth anything. They don't make money. I refuse to believe that they're profitable. It doesn't seem. I understand business pretty well. It doesn't seem, and I understand how a site like IGN works, and it just doesn't seem to make any sense as CPMs go down, as demand goes down, as it becomes more reliant on scraping on Google and DuckDuckGo and other stuff. So it's not that I'm optimistic that they'll repair themselves. I think my optimism more is in the shaking out of the cream, right? Or the chaff from the wheat, where a lot of people, like, Nathan Grayson got through and somehow got to the Washington Post, which is hysterical. But remember that for all of those guys, many people are just falling by the wayside, leaving the industry and going and doing other things because there's no room for them anymore. And I think that by shaking it out, like, you're almost panning for gold. In the pan, when it's all done, will be, I think, many a Twitch streamer, many a YouTuber, many a podcaster that benefits from the loss of those institutions losing their audiences. Because no matter if Nathan Grayson has no built-in audience, right? It's just it was being said a lot about. Do you know who Taylor Lorenz is at the New York Times by chance?
I've got a whole podcast episode coming out about her very soon. She is ghastly.
Yeah, she's the worst. And it was brought up by I think Glenn Greenwald, who I'm a huge fan of, that she was offered maybe a $250,000 or $300,000 deal at Substack, and she turned it down because I think she understood she has no audience. So she's never, ever going to meet that threshold. And then after a year, they're just going to throw her out. And so she stays at the New York Times because the masthead protects these people and gives them an enhanced reach.
I think on the protection point as well, Colin, I think that she has done so many defamatory and potentially libelous stories.
Definitely.
I think she needs to stay at a publication. Otherwise, she is going to be mired in lawsuits.
Yeah. I mean, she has some, the whole thing, what happened with her in Clubhouse alone was with Mark Thiessen, or who, I don't know if it's Mark. It was one of those guys where I was like, she totally lied about this dude. But I bring her up only because the people that have the seeming power, like if you're a writer at the New York Times, that seems like a big deal, but you have no audience. If she leaves the New York Times and went to Substack and says, are you going to pay $5 a month? They're not. And She knows that as well as the New York Times knows that, which is why, and as well as Nathan Grayson knows that, as well as others. Ethan Gach left Kotaku and was like, I'm going to go on Patreon. He'd be on the fucking street. That would be the end of that. So I think that these incestuous kind of situations are their own thing, and it sucks because they have so much power. But I encourage some optimism in the sense that, again, we are able to circumnavigate all of these old things. We don't need MSNBC anymore, right? Now we have Jimmy Dore. Now we have Kyle Kulinski, and we don't need Fox News anymore because now we have the editors and we have Left, Right, and Center and all these other things that come out. And we don't need IGN anymore because you have Sacred Symbols, and you have Easy Allies, and you have Jimquisition, and you have Richard Lewis, and all these different things, right? You don't necessarily need, even with Dextero and all those other things, like you don't need them anymore necessarily, like we did 10, 15, 20 years ago. So while everything has been broadened out and more people can get in an easier way, the talent rises to the top because the talent requires stickiness, knowledge, repeatability, learning from failure, and all those things. And these people don't have it. So they have to stay and hope as the musical chairs play on and on and on, and the chairs get hurled away. A lot of these people are fucked, and no one knows it better than them. And I think that that's where maybe the fear comes from. The cornered cat mentality, right? They're almost crazier than ever because they know their number's about to be pulled, and they know that they have not fostered anything like an audience. In fact, Patricia Hernandez said something in an interview I read. God, where was it? It might have been on Polygon or something. She gave an interview about Kotaku, and she said something really interesting, which was she wishes she fostered her own audience earlier, but she realizes that she didn't, and it's too late. And I'm like, man, that is one of the most honest things I've ever heard anyone in your position say.
Yeah.
But you're certainly not acting like it with the hires you're making at Kotaku. Because that's the other thing that bothers me too, is imagine what someone like you or someone like me or Ryan McCaffrey or something would do with that built-in platform. And then imagine being someone
I'd
like
love to have a crack at editing that publication.
Me too.
I believe I could turn it around, honestly.
I believe the same thing. I 100% believe that either you or I could do it. And I've said it, not to keep railing on these guys, although I don't care about them, but imagine being Ian Walker or Ethan Gach and working at a place like that for years and having no following. Yeah. Imagine having leveraged that so badly that you have no following. Now, it's not to say that the outlet is to blame, because there are plenty of people that did have a following that left, like Jason Schreier. He worked in the trenches right along you, Ethan. So why does my mom have more Twitter followers than you? Right? It's weird. And I think that that's the thing that really makes them scared. Because I loved what Patricia said, because I just thought it was really honest. And I think Kotaku's got to be finished. And
I always suspect as well, Colin, if you got these people alone, just one-on-one, with maybe the exception of Ian, because I've been in that position. But, I think they would just open up and admit to it. I've seen a number of them, by the way, privately, with other colleagues of mine in the business. They say, look, I didn't really want to hitch myself to this particular wagon, but it's all there is. And this is if you want to work as a games journalist, this is essentially what you have to subscribe to, even if it's an app that you have to lean into. I think a lot of them would be content to admit that actually it's a deeply unsatisfactory life they're leading, because they're essentially, it's a fucking shadow play. They're not themselves. Yeah,
you're probably right too, in that there's an inherent fear. I know. I mean, I was at IGN. I survived 6 layoffs at IGN, and in some way you didn't get scared of it after a while, because it's like, listen, I work so hard, my numbers are so high, they're not going to lay me off. And you could kind of identify and guess who they would lay off, and they always did lay those people off, with rare exception. But that fear is always there, and the only way to kind of overcome it, in my opinion, is to just work really hard, be really good at what you do, put in the time and the talent, the 10,000 hour rule, right? Like, play games and podcast a lot, and YouTube and Twitch stream, and do what you can to control like, if I were these guys, and I've seen some people really seize the day, like Destin Legary and others, where it's like, if I were in a position now, I'd be reinforcing myself, because I know that the rating's on the wall. But a lot of these people just can't reinforce themselves. It goes back to Taylor Lorenz, has hundreds of thousands of Twitter followers, works for the New York Times, but could not write a Substack. And I think that is the biggest thing. Meanwhile, Last Stand, my company, has 12,500 people paying us every month for our content, and
largest gaming Patreon, isn't it? Right?
Yeah, just on our Patreon, like almost 12,500 people at an average of, our average patron is $5. So it's there for the taking. I think people just need to aim smaller, understand that niches you don't have to have millions of views anymore to make money. And so aim smaller and treat your audience with some respect. I think that's all the audience really wants at the end of the day is like, I listen to people I vehemently disagree with all the time, but I don't feel like they don't like me either.
Yeah.
And I just think that it's pretty easy to do that.
So I'm glad you've brought it exactly where I wanted to be for the wrap up, because I did want to end on a positive note. You know, we've talked about a lot of no, it's great. It's simpatico. I'm loving it.
Yeah, it's cathartic for me. Yeah.
Oh no, I also appreciate that. I mean, again, one of the spider webs I was, considering going down is that, I wanted to talk a bit about the Total Biscuit phenomenon, because between what happened to you and what happened to John, John pretty much taught me everything I would come to learn about being a public figure. And we did podcasts and stuff together, and I missed that motherfucker like you wouldn't believe. But seeing the grave dancing after he passed away, and how they continue to do it on the anniversary of his death, even on his I think it was his wife's birthday. Fucking awful. These people are evil. They are.
Yeah, I agree. I found that incredibly fucked.
Yeah,
as well. And I had only spoken to him a few times behind the scenes before he passed, and I was supposed to do a podcast with him, and we just couldn't line it up. And I wish that I was able to make
his greatest sin, by the way, much like you, was simply to say, while he doesn't support the harassment of any individual on the internet, as he himself has a particular window into that, having been harassed because he was a huge public figure, he does think there were some ethical concerns in journalism, and for that they harass his widow after his death. It's fucking
it's
garbage.
Awful. It's awful. And the only thing you can't say this with 100% universal certainty, but people that act like that can't possibly live fulfilling or meaningful, happy lives. Now, I'm not the fucking poster child for happiness by any stretch of the imagination, but I really do feel like a lot of the stuff that people feel and say about me are just projections, because actually when you go and read like the way I act online and the things I say to people, I'm like, man, there are times where I go to someone's feed and I'm like, there are literally 20 things here from the last month worse than anything I've ever said in my entire life, even privately. Yeah. And so it is a shame, but I think people are starting to see through what is a confidence game in some way, where the goods aren't there. It's people know it's not there. Podcast Beyond is still going, but Sacred Symbols does more traffic than Podcast Beyond, and Podcast Beyond is owned by IGN.
Yeah,
I think people are starting to realize they've got to go elsewhere to get that information, and it's a shame that so many people conspired to fuck it all up, because they really did. But I think I take a lot of solace in the fact that it wasn't just, thankfully or not thankfully, unique to us. Like you said, it happened in politics, it happens in entertainment, it happens in science. I mean, look at what happened with COVID and the way science wrote about it, and the Lancet and all these people hiding the tracks of what really happened, right? And we all know what really happened. So it just goes to show you, you brought the great term persona non grata earlier. If you said that that COVID came from the lab in Wuhan, which it did, then if you said that for like the first year, you were done. Like just that, and that's true, right? Like, so that's the point. Like, I walk away more than anything is that I just don't believe fucking anybody, and I really go to the people that are putting their own face out, their own name, and they say what they need to say. That's why I really like Glenn Greenwald. That's why I really like Jimmy Dore, and I really like some of these people, because I don't agree with everything they say, but they put it all on the line, and they seem consistent, and they seem honest, and they seem like they care. And I think that people that are attracted to high talent, high caliber creators like you or me, in my opinion, they're going to be attracted to that because we're giving them the goods. Because you can't fake it for very long on your own. It's easy to fake it. I saw a lot of people fake it at IGN. It's easy to do. When you're on your own, you can't fake anymore. And that's the Taylor Lorenz conundrum, because she could have made twice as much money on Substack for 1 year as she makes at New York Times, but she was smart enough, to her credit, to know that that was a bad move. And you even see it with what's her name, Hannah Nicole, the 1619 Project woman.
Where it's like,
I don't know how big you'd be without the New York Times. I don't know that you would have won your Pulitzer without that. I don't know any of those things.
The fact that won a Pulitzer and then was immediately like and was subject to, I think, about a dozen corrections. It again.
Yeah,
journalism,
by the way, from like
dead, bro. Like I'm embarrassed. I used to take great pride. I used to say to people, when people used to say to me, "What do you do for a living?" I'd say journalist. Now I just tell them I stream. I'm on Twitch. I don't use the J word.
Yeah, I wouldn't use. I mean, I don't consider myself one anymore. But people have said it to me before. It's like, you haven't considered yourself a journalist in 7 years, and you're still maybe one of the 5 best journalists in the industry. And I'm like, but I'm not even digging. Like at IGN, I used to tell huge stories and dig things up and all that. I don't really do so much of that anymore. In fact, the things like I knew about that Wolverine game, for instance.
Yeah,
but I didn't even say anything because that's not what I do anymore.
It's also tiring. It's very exhausting. I was an investigative journalist. I've exposed some crazy shit. I've changed the shape of my industry with one story every year. No one else gets to say that. Certainly not at the moment. But I'm like you. It's like, if it's always me that's got to be out front and center, absorbing all the flack and the negativity and the hatred, because everyone thinks I'm going to be definitely wrong this time. He must be wrong this time. Got a 100% accuracy record over my career, but he's definitely wrong this time. You just think to yourself, what am I doing this for? Why is it always got to be such a crucible? And when is someone else going to come and do it? And no one, bar one or two. It's an awful place to be. And like you, I've got a community that I can just retreat into now and do my own thing. And that's certainly the long-term plan. Because fuck going to the wall for people that wouldn't do it for you and don't appreciate it that you do it for them.
That's exactly right. And I hate to say that I've succumbed to that mentality lately, but I have, in the sense that I used to really be one of the guys that was like, hey, wait a minute. Just because they want to cancel you, don't cancel them. Just because they want to ruin your life, don't ruin their life. My whole thing now is I'm not going to be a participant, but I'm not going to say anything otherwise. Because why? You never once gave me the benefit of the doubt, ever once. And so I won't piss on you if you're on fire. Doesn't mean that I want you to be on fire, but I'm not your helping hand anymore than you were mine.
I'm gonna hold on to my urine.
Right, exactly. For a more imminent fire about what in which needs to be extinguished on someone that is actually nice to me or cares about me. But you said it so well in the sense that we have audiences that we can retreat to, and I love that word. That's the perfect word. I'm so grateful to people that listen to me and support us. Very similar to what they're doing for you. They've allowed me to create a company where everyone is paid well and fairly and appreciated. And I'm super grateful for that. And that only comes through patience of an audience that understands that not everything is as it seems. And I assume that you must have a similar audience. And I'm sure that the Venn diagram between our audience is probably pretty substantial on those kinds of people, the people that want a little bit of a deeper story, a little bit more honesty. They don't want the peripheral 2-minute elevator pitch on everything. And they don't want predictable political takes. And when something happens, I already know what these sites are going to say. I mean, that's boring. I think that people like something a little different. And the beauty is that that's where my optimism comes from, I guess, is me and you are force multipliers for many others that will do the same thing. And eventually I do believe that those other forces will be eroded. And I think that the evidence is on the wall. I think that there's reason, or in the ether rather. I think that look at, I brought up Brexit, right? Or Theresa May, and then 2016, 2020, etc. All of those were wrong in some way. And social media and the prevailing wisdom would have allowed you to believe that one thing was going to overwhelmingly happen. And in most of those cases, the other thing happened. And in one of those cases, the other thing almost happened, right? So I just think that in that silence, in that mixture of data, in that messiness, is the solution. And the solution is decentralization and people like you and people like me and many others. And I don't even deal with PR. I haven't talked to gaming PR in 3 years almost. I don't get games early.
I wouldn't even trust them to represent you accurately anymore.
Oh, no, definitely not. In fact, as you probably know, we were given a PAX, the PAX Theater at PAX West 2019 for Sacred Symbols, which is like the big thing that they do. And then they just canceled us.
Yeah,
right?
I was going to bring that up, but we kind of went down a nice cul-de-sac. I don't know if you, I don't, and again, I know you've talked about it a lot on the podcast itself and everything else. But again, that's just an example of the type of, crazy levels of influence these people have. It's not their audience. Fuck their audience. It's tiny, and the people who belong in it are kooks by and large. It's when they start saying, essentially, well, our entire publications will blacklist you, boycott you, or publish negative stories about you. We'll talk to sponsors, we'll talk to developers if this guy is allowed to go ahead and do what he should be doing. It's like they don't play by any appreciable fair set of rules. And we always take the high ground and allow them to do it.
Right. Oh, they're a private business, so they can do whatever they want, but not that private business making that decision.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like it's so ridiculous. Yeah, there's nothing really because it's the same thing. It's just I don't know what I did. That's, I think, the great game of telephone, right?
Yeah.
We can talk about the joke and we can talk about all, but it's like, what did I really do? It doesn't exist. And that's what I said at the top of the show, which was I've met and worked with and had a good relationship with so many people in this industry that have turned their back on me for political expediency. And that's why I can't wait to one day just print and I'm going to publish all of my my peer reviews from my entire time at IGN. There's many of them, and it'll be so hysterical. I can't wait to do that, to just show everyone how full of shit they are. And well, that will be fun to do. But in the meantime, I think we just have to try. I think the best way we solve these problems, these myriad problems that we brought up, is to just be ourselves. I think the audience appreciates that. They know who's telling the truth and who's not. They're smarter than the average bear. I think that's what annoys them the most, is that these people, Kotakus of the world, they treat them like they're fucking idiots. And I think they resent it. I think a lot of them, I think lemmings like being told exactly what they want to believe but I don't think most people are lemmings.
So just as a final point then, because I said I did want to end on like a positive note, because
oh yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah,
no. Hey, don't worry about it. I'd love it. It's flown by the time, and it's been wonderful to talk to you about these things. But if there's somebody out there that is on the fence, maybe someone who works in the industry or somebody that's thinking about getting into the industry, what would be the pieces of advice you would tell them about essentially taking the plunge? Because it is a massive leap of faith to essentially say, I am going to try and create content. I believe the content will be good enough that people will want to pay to see it and have access to it. So, and you've done it. You've proven a huge success, as you said, bigger and more influential than you probably ever were when you worked at big mastheads like IGN. So what would you say are the most important parts of the blueprint to follow?
I think the important thing is to realize that the blueprint, I think, has largely changed. When I started writing in the late 90s, people were writing at fan sites and you're writing on GameFAQs and all that, but there was a pretty big barrier to entry. Like, you had to use an FTP protocol and all, update indexes and do all the, it wasn't accessible. And the more accessible things got, the more people got involved. And the unfortunate mathematical reality is that as opportunities are dwindling, more people are getting in. So it's bad math. And I always try to tell people, as much as they don't want to hear it, is that go in understanding that your likelihood of really succeeding is not good. And if you can really tell yourself that I accept that math and I'm going to do everything I can to augment it, I think you're going to have a better opportunity of succeeding. What I mean by that is there are things that happen that you can and cannot control. Timing and luck are two things that are really important that are hard to control, but you can control output. You can control timeliness, quality, repeatability, and all of those things. And I think that you'll agree that those are the essences of a successful online business, because when Friday at noon rolls around, everyone knows Sacred Symbols is going up because we've never missed a week. Everyone knows Knockback goes up on Monday because we don't miss a week. Everyone knows Defining Duke goes live on Wednesday because we don't miss a week. And if you can do that and keep the quality high, then you'll know that you've at least done everything you can to control the mathematical equation to give you the best outcome possible. And that's what I always tell people. There are no guarantees, and it's a hard hill to climb. And you have to accept that the luck, the timing, all that you can't control. But everything else that you can control, put it all on the field, and you'll at least know. I think that's what's most important. If you fail or it doesn't work out, at least you know, and you won't wonder that you could have left it all on the field.
Yeah.
So that's my important. And I also encourage people, build it on the side, and be willing to put in the extra work and do the crunch. Oh no, to make it happen. Because I work every day, and that's just the way it goes. And so make sure to balance that out, find that free time, and then maybe that segue. Let's say you work 8 hours a day, you work a few hours a day on your content, and maybe that math changes so that you're working 8 hours a day on your content, 3 hours or 2 hours at the deli or whatever, and then so on, and to keep your healthcare, and then before you know, you're out. So that's my advice. I don't know if it's good advice, but that's what I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the same as you, brother. I echo those sentiments. I know crunch is a terrible thing, and I openly speak out against it. But there's a difference between crunch, some corporation flogging you to within an inch of your life to get something that's going to make them a fortune finished, and you working, crazy 16-hour days spread across 3 jobs because you're chasing a dream. That type of workload can be exhausting, but I also think it can bring about its own reward. And I don't think I've met many people that have the things they want in life that at some point in their life didn't commit themselves over to that. So yeah, hard work's not the big bad that some people say it is. And be very skeptical about the people who tell you it is.
No, I agree. In fact, I would say that anyone who tells you hard work isn't a massive part of the equation has never succeeded in their life. Like, what has ever happened that was worthwhile that didn't happen because of hard work? That's just it just doesn't work. You don't become a fucking pro athlete by just lollygagging around. You don't become. So that's my whole thing, is I think that, and I also think that it's important to note, and I mean this as a positive, although I think some people take it as a negative, is that this world isn't for everyone. I don't think that there's anything wrong with having a blue or white collar job that's repeatable, and you go to work and you punch a clock and you sit at a desk and you have a family and you have healthcare and it's good, and you're working to live and all of that. I think that's awesome. If you are working to live in your life, then don't do this. And because you're just going to disappoint yourself.
Yeah.
But yeah. I think that you're absolutely right. There's no better person to work for at the end of the day than yourself. And I'm very fortunate to work for myself and have a staff of people too. But I was on the other side of that. I worked at a fucking horse stable. I worked as a landscaper. I worked as a groundskeeper. I cleaned bathrooms and did all those kinds of things. I know what that world is like, and I know how good I have it now. So I'm willing to do all that's necessary to keep it. But I have so much respect out there for the people that do real jobs, because I know how lucky my life and how fortunate my life is, and that people have to go out there and grind every day. And that's why I love doing podcasts, is because I know that it's blaring in a FedEx driver's truck right now, or
exactly,
right, or in a plumber's earbuds.
That's the big thing with me. I got a ton of people that come on my Discord and they're all like, "Oh, thanks for the content. It got me through a night shift." I've worked those shifts. I used to work on a farm snapping chicken necks for £3 an hour. I've done some of the shittest jobs on this planet. And the idea that, content is helping people get through factory jobs and things like that, and just making that existence a little bit more tolerable, that's a great feeling. That means more to me than any endorsement.
I agree, because because we're lucky enough to entertain the people that really make the world go. And I think that's really cool. And I think it's cool that people want to get involved in that too. I don't blame you. I just want people to keep their expectations in check, because I just feel like, at the very least, I think that if you're trying to be a games journalist in quotes, I think you should dissuade yourself of that. I think if you want to be like a Twitch streamer or YouTuber, I think that's different. But that's it. If your dream is to work at IGN, I think you should really let that go, because I just think that you might get there, but then what?
the party's over, I think.
Oh, definitely. And like you said, people jump out of those places and go to publishers and go to developers and stuff. But even those jobs are kind of harder to come by, because that pipeline is kind of clogged up. And that's where associate producers used to come from those roles, and the early community developer managers and all that. So
community manager, the most wretched, servile job on the internet.
Oh my God, I would never want to do that.
No.
So yeah, so I'll be interested to see like what the new crop of people are, and I want some good competition from the bottom. Like, come do a PlayStation podcast and give me a challenge, for God's sake, please.
So look, we can wrap it up there. Obviously, I'm sure you've got loads of stuff to plug, because you are a busy man. So have at it.
Yeah, I mean, we do all of our podcasts under a moniker called Last Stand, and you can find us on Patreon at patreon.com/laststandmedia. All of our stuff is free though, too, or most of it is eventually, so you don't have to pay. If you want to just go check it out, you can do so. We're on YouTube and podcast services. And then I own or co-own a game developer, Lily Mo, and we put out old school arcade games. So we're working on a couple things now, but our most recent game was Hybroxia 2, which is a space shooter, and that came out earlier this year. That's on everything, so people can go check that out. But generally speaking, I'm not a very good self-promoter. I like just having these conversations, and if you're interested, you can Google around and find us.
Well, thank you for being so gracious with your time. It's been a long time coming. It's like you say, there's a little enclave of holdouts against the nonsense, and I think it's always important that we check in with each other from time to time, if for no other reason than just to try and keep us sane.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I'd love to have you on Sacred as well. So we'll set that
fantastic.
up in the coming weeks, because I think it would be fun to talk more about the expertise you bring to bear in your world, and we don't get to talk about those things very much in our audience. So I think that'll be a lot of fun, and I want to thank you again for having me. I totally agree that there are certain people, even some people that are still in, like I think Ryan McCaffrey is one of those people, and Destin Legary, that are just fucking tired of everything. And I love what you said. Yeah, it's important to kind of have like a league of extraordinary gentlemen, as it were.
Yeah. So there you have it, guys. Colin Moriarty, the great one. Make sure you support him. He's a fantastic critic and a brilliant mind. And in these terrible times, we really all need the support from you guys to keep going forward.
Yes.
So throw him a follow and check out his Patreon. Patreon. I'm sure you guys will be interested with that. And look, there it is. Another episode of the Richard Lewis Show wrapped up. I don't know who the guest will be. I never really do for the next one, nor do I know when it'll come out, but I'm sure it'll be another banger. So make sure you follow, like, subscribe, all that Zoomer shit for more content like this. And I'll see you on the next episode. Until then, take care.